Watchtower.
Talk with you about this news about the Trump Foundation. Let's start there. Here's what Senator Harry Reid said this morning. Listen.
Trump started his charity because he's desperate to get invited to fancy parties and be seen with these people who give their own money. And he seeks acceptance among the wealthy. Since 2008, Trump has not donated a single penny to his own charity, the Trump Foundation.
Senator Reid there, Hugh, you've got that Washington Post story Casey was just talking about, documents they've reviewed appearing to show Trump used foundation money to pay some $250,000 in legal fees. You see the headline there. Hugh, how is this story not getting worse for Donald Trump?
It's actually not. Harry Reid, you can't believe a word he says, Hallie. You remember 4 years ago, he just blatantly lied and said that Mitt Romney had not paid any taxes. When he was called on that after the campaign, he said it worked, didn't it? So he will lie. We know that for a fact. As to the Washington Post story, I read it myself. It's a very complicated legal issue. I honed in on the one part where a $100,000 fine had been assessed by the city of Palm Beach against Donald Trump because he built too big of a flagpole. I don't have the settlement in front of me. I don't know if it was permissible to use funds from the Donald Trump Foundation under the city settlement. I do know that how big of a flagpole is really kind of a crazy thing for the city of Palm Beach to be so. And I don't think it's going to move voters. I think Mr. Rahami going back and forth to Pakistan twice and being called, there's a New York Times story that's breaking at this moment that Mr. Rahami's father told the FBI his son was a terrorist. And I think that's going to be the major narrative that's going to help Donald Trump and is going to call into question Hillary Clinton's viability as a serious candidate when it comes to domestic security.
And let's be clear, Donald Trump wants to be talking about national security, Hugh. That is why he is focused on immigration in these last two rallies these last couple of days. But on the Trump Foundation, the appearance that he even may have used his own charity's money to pay off legal fees, I think there are some critics who would say that will move certain voters, particularly voters that Trump needs to be appealing to right now.
There might be someone out there on the margin who moves now because of a foundation story. If so, there are just as many who will move, I think, Hallie, because of Gilbert Shiguri and the Clinton Foundation and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and the Foreign Agents Registration Act. I'm not sure the Clintons want to be stressing foundation stories. But I go back to the much bigger issue. I really don't think all of these small grass, small weed stories about foundation donations and settlements is going to move the electorate when we had multiple explosions in New York, a stabbing with the Tulsa shooting today is a terrible story that I covered extensively. These move the electorate, not these small grain stories.
So how about what we're seeing now, these reports from former President George H.W. Bush, this report that perhaps he is going to be voting for Hillary Clinton, a spokesman telling NBC News that he is a private citizen and will be casting a private vote in November. But, you know just as well as I do, the Bushes have remained on the sidelines of this race. Now some indication that potentially the former president won't be voting for Donald Trump, a concern.
Well, I read the story, and I don't believe that private conversation was intended for publication, and I'm not going to put much stock in it. I will note, George H.W. Bush is one of the finest Americans living. That George H.W. Bush silence is telling, as is George W. Bush. George Shultz, another one of the greatest Americans, went ashore at Peleliu, is also silent. But Bob Dole, who fought up Italy in the 10th Mountain Division, is for Donald Trump. So we have one former nominee for him. Mitt Romney, George W. Bush, and George H.W. Bush have said nothing. Mitt Romney not going to vote for him, has said explicitly he won't. That's not good, but it's also, I don't believe, decisive at this point. When you get to a binary choice, Supreme Court, Supreme Court, Supreme Court, Supreme Court. We had 3,000 people out in Pasadena on Sunday night. Hallie, most of them did not support Donald Trump, including Mark Levin during the primary season. They are now getting on board and going to vote for Donald Trump because they simply can't imagine Hillary Clinton as commander-in-chief.
Hugh, before I let you go, I got to talk about this Skittles issue. Donald Trump Jr., as you know, in some hot water because of this picture that he put out showing a bowl of Skittles, comparing them to Syrian refugees. Wrigley, the parent company of Skittles, writing, "Skittles are candy, refugees are people. We don't feel it's an appropriate analogy." It is an analogy, by the way, that we are learning Donald Trump Jr. has made before, just with the Pittsburgh paper fairly recently. I got to ask you what you make of this. And this is not the first time, by the way, that Donald Trump Jr. has said something that has been distracting, frankly, to his father's campaign. I got to tell you, even people outside the political world, the political realm, are noticing this. This has sort of broken through just beyond the discussion inside the Beltway, this idea that this analogy was made that a lot of folks find, frankly, very insensitive.
I think this is an absurd story, Hallie.
Why?
Skittles itself used a metaphor 4 days ago, comparing the mixture of its sweet and sour Skittles to Earth and Saturn. That's called metaphor. 2 days ago, I said Ted Strickland,
That's not an
Democratic
offensive
nominee
metaphor,
for Senate.
Hugh, though, right? I mean, that's not a metaphor talking
I'll
about
come to
people that a lot of folks find dehumanizing.
He wasn't talking about people. He was talking about degree of difficulty of detection. That was the metaphor. He wasn't talking about refugees. And I believe, in fact, that this politically correct response by the Wrigley Company is going to play into the disgust in America with politically correct tut-tutting. People are willing to put up with protests during the national anthem, but you can't use a metaphor to discuss the degree of difficulty in detection. That's what the metaphor is for. Metaphors are used every day. And if we begin to have thought police from the Wrigley Company telling us which ones we can use and which ones we can't, they get to use the one of Earth and Saturn, but Donald Trump Jr. doesn't get to talk about degree of difficulty metaphors, we will not have any kind of effective speech in the country. I do not believe this does anything but help Donald Trump as people become disgusted with the thought police.
Hugh Hewitt, thanks for being with us, although I would take issue with you on even the degree of issue and a degree of difficulty analogy.